Hey everyone, we're about ready for our next session. So in the last session, and welcome everyone on the stream as well, I just wanted to remind folks that you can also, in addition to asking questions in the room, you can ask questions in the app, and folks on the stream, please leverage the question widget to ask questions. I get it all right here, so we're happy to take questions for wherever you are. So in the last session, which was a great session from Stephanie Shuckers, she mentioned the FIDO Alliance and our work around biometric certification. So we're really happy to have Stephanie, who is the vice chair of our biometrics certification working group, join us for the next session, along with Greg Cannon of Amazon, who's the chair of the biometrics working group. To join us to talk about what we're looking at as an alliance in terms of the value of biometrics, why we're certifying, some of the improvements and enhancements to the program, and what's coming next. So please welcome Stephanie and Greg to the stage.
Do we sit? Stand?
We can sit.
Oh, let's sit.
You
okay,
wanna sit? You
sure.
wanna stand?
We'll have a. It doesn't matter. So, first, thank you. I'm Greg Cannon, Stephanie Shuckers, as you just heard. We are your biometric B team here, and we are very grateful, and I'm very happy to actually be here physically in person. This is first time I think I've been to a conference where I've actually spoken in about 2.5 years, so pretty exciting. So we're at FIDO Authenticate 2022, and I like to just remind us that we're all about trying to eliminate passwords. And biometrics is a great technology for doing that, right? It's got this fantastic mix between convenience and security, something you can easily tune, like from just being barely better than Touch Plus to being kind of something really secure for like step-up authentication for secure transactions. And so it's a great way to allow relying parties to choose how they want people to access that service. I think it's, how do we, yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
there we go.
Right.
Big green triangle.
Did I do it right
Yeah.
or not?
Which one did you push?
Did I do something bad? Green? Green.
Green.
All right.
Yes.
So for biometrics at FIDO, it's all about being local and being designed for privacy. Biometrics are local to the user, they remain on the device. The protocols don't actually work, try to put too much information about what actually happened on the biometric transaction. It's all about unlocking that private key to sign an assertion that that person who you think should be accessing that service is the person they said so. Biometrics gives you a little bit of multi-factor authentication, depending on how strong it is, to give you a better sense of knowing who that person is who's accessing the service. So FIDO protocols is about making sure we address the risks associated with biometrics. There's two major risks. One is that biometrics is an errored process. We talked about false match rates, false non-match rates, and then we all know that there's also presentation attack detection. There could be spoofed. And so the biometric requirements is about evaluating those risks, mitigating those risks, and making sure that relying parties, if they want, they can get independent laboratory evaluation of an authenticator. You don't have to trust the vendor. It's a super strong value, right? So, and you don't have to invest in your own laboratory capability to be a relying party that utilizes biometrics. Super strong value, and it's a great way to allow the entire ecosystem to take advantage of biometrics in a more trustworthy way. Make sense? Awesome. Okay, so this is a sort of a flow of how the biometric testing and certification works. The key thing is that, again, it's about independence. If you use this capability, you don't have to trust the vendor. The vendor also has a lot of control in the situation. They establish the operating point by which it's going to be tested, and the laboratory basically assures that what the vendor provides is accurate. A lot of times the vendor can say, I self-attest to 1 in 100,000 false accept and a strong false reject, and the laboratory is basically just testing that the vendor isn't lying, right? And it's giving assurance that this is going to be a system that's good. Vendor controls availability of test reports. They establish how they're going to be publishing those results on their metadata, and they go through a particular process that's laid out with the biometric requirements in the certification working group about how we actually do that. Certification, I'm going to get into, just before your pre-lunch entertainment, I'm going to get into the details of this for the next 7 hours. I know that's going to be so much fun, but I'm going to stay at a pretty high level. So, the requirements allow for different architectures. One is the authenticator itself, or sometimes biometric vendors, they're providing like a module, and so they want to be able to get that module approved for integration by the platform providers. So we support both types of certifications, and we allow the laboratory to do things like the user would, more representative of how the user would actually use the system. We do 5 transactions, we utilize online and offline testing, and we're basically trying to find the right balance between cost and assurance, third-party assurance, that gives the relying parties the best benefit at the lowest cost. And also the vendors, so that they don't have to be, also is a strong service for the vendor, because they don't have to be constantly just showing data that they can't reproduce, their own data. It's complicated to be a vendor and prove to your customer that you're trustworthy. It's much better when you have an external lab and that you can rely on to help make a sale or help establish an authenticator as trustworthy. It's also got diversity of test subjects, and as Stephanie just mentioned, we're thinking about something more joyful as well. So, more excitement for your pre-lunch activities. So we have currently two levels where we have a large number of subjects to establish a very strong threshold for false accept rate, a nicer threshold for false reject rate, and we test a number of presentation attack instruments. Very fancy words for just different types of spoofs for a particular modality, and we allow self-attestation. I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to transition over to my.
This is where you say, Stephanie, what's in the box?
What's in the box, Stephanie?
Oh, let me show you. So I'm sure you all want to know what's in the box. So PAD stands for Presentation Attack Detection. This is an ISO word that's focused on essentially the mechanism of which someone may decide, let's see who that someone may be, to show up.
Oh, it's me.
And no, it's you being me.
Happy Halloween.
May decide to try to spoof. You take my phone here, Greg.
Okay.
Spoof me in their system. And so essentially what we're doing is the labs actually create biometric spoofs. And I have a number of them here in my box. That's just the face. We also have fingers and iris, so I will leave these up here for folks to look at afterwards. And do testing on the biometric, what we call targeted evaluation, the thing that's submitted for testing. And so we do multiple spoof tests. We bring in subjects that are the basis of which they create the spoofs. Then the lab actually creates the spoofs and runs it against the biometric component. And so it's measured, its performance, its metric is what's called the imposter attack presentation accept rate. But basically you can just say, how well does it reject spoofs? That's really what we're measuring there. And let's see, there's some numbers. Let's move to the next. This is the fun table.
Test for your eyes.
Right.
Can you read row 4, cell 2? No. Yeah.
Row 4, cell 2. So we have laid out the spoof kind of categories of testing at a high level that the labs will test to. Labs do testing at level A and level B, and we reserve level C for the future. So we kind of say this is what we're not testing for now because it's a function of the time, expertise, equipment, where the biometric's coming from that causes a type of spoof attack to be in level A, B, or C. And so right now, within FIDO, we're focusing on the level A and B attacks because it just takes you don't have to be an expert to make these things, and thus those are the things that are more likely to happen and the things we want to reject. And so even if you have a novel biometric that's not included in this list, we also have a mechanism by which we can work with the labs and the vendor to create the spoofs that would be appropriate for testing.
So I'm very glad that you are all very interested. I think that's a great possibility that you can actually help us with our current work. We're doing some exciting stuff. So the first thing is that we look at that number 245. That's a pretty significant cost driver and time driver for these tests. And part of the goal for us is to be able to do this very scalably, right? We want to make it so easy for vendors to do this, and we want to drive the demand from relying parties so that this is a value, a very strong value that drives FIDO adoption. To do that, we might not need, to Stephanie's point from the last session, we might not need such an emphasis on false accept rate. We've already got two-factor authentication for the most part, and so if people lose their phone, they're kind of like on it right away, right? So now putting a biometric on top of that means that for many use cases, you probably can relax a little bit about false accept rate. Just like she said in bias, we should probably be more focused on the false non-match rate for a verification use case. Security is an issue. We don't want to stop testing it. But again, we can trust our vendors. They can show us the data that they use to attest at a high level, and we can just assure that it's basically not broken, that the vendor is not lying. And that's by bringing down the number of people, so 245 people collecting, expensive, right? Bringing it down to a number like 25, much less expensive, right? And we can utilize those people, leverage those people to do IAPIR testing for PAD. That's enough to establish a reasonable number for both false match rate and false non-match rate. Another thing that's interesting is that another potential value for FIDO is that we have a lot of high-level platform providers in the FIDO ecosystem, like Microsoft and Google and Apple and plenty of others. They all have their own biometric certification systems. I believe we have an opportunity to align and try to bring some more consensus or more commonality or interoperability for vendors and for the ecosystem. So we're working to align in our group with some of these platform requirements and try to bring some convergence in the industry. Finally, ISO alignment is always a moving target. Every standard, whether it's ours or an ISO, is always under revision. And ISO has, biometrics is a rapidly evolving field. Many improvements associated with bias and accuracy and other issues like aging and, I have constantly, there's just a lot of technology and a lot of improvement, a lot of new technology that's trying to find that right balance between convenience and security. Standards have to be maintained and be revised. Part of that means that we have to continue to align with ISO standards. So they change their vocabulary. So much fun. They change best practices for testing performance or best practices for testing presentation attack detection. And our FIDO requirements are already part of ISO standards. We donated some of them, so they're annexes in the ISO standards, which is pretty great. But to continue that relationship needs constant work. And I think, to Stephanie's point, I think we'd like to start thinking about how to test bias in our performance testing as well. And I'm hoping that at least all of you join us. There's some information there, some links to find out other joyful information about the Biometrics Working Group. Not to mention the Identity Working Group. This also has a lot of biometric aspects of it. And that's all. And it's almost lunchtime. But we are happy to take questions. And please feel free to play with the toys for Halloween.
Do you have a question from Jamie Danker?
So I'm curious, how do you recruit 245 subjects? Like, how do you go about that? I'm also curious, how are you able to go from 245 to 25 to get results that you think are reliable?
Yeah.
I'm happy.
Oh,
I'm happy to answer. But yeah.
So the laboratories, that's their job, to recruit subjects. So they basically, as they get new subjects coming in, they create a database. From that database, they captures some of the demographic information, and then when a new study goes out, they say, hey, we're looking for subjects. Subjects come, in this, and then they come in and sign up for testing, go through, whatever the consent forms that the laboratory has put in place, and then they go through the testing. So it is a very expensive and time-consuming process. The reason why we're not just doing a database test is because when we think of the ecosystem of biometrics for authentication, so think biometrics on phones, the variety of the sensor, profiles and the way it all operates is obviously worldwide, right? And so we're talking about, not just face, but we got fingerprint, we've got potentially voice, we've got iris, other novel modalities. So you really need to bring the whole end-to-end system in for testing, and we typically call that a scenario test, right? A test that not only does the algorithm on the back end, but all the front end stuff too, in the way you've designed it to operate with real people. So that's the first question.
I can take the second one.
Yeah, good.
Why not? So when you have 245 subjects, that gives you some large number of imposter pairs, right? 245 times 244 divided by 2. And we bootstrap those samples, and we also use something called the rule of 3. And so if we get 0 errors, and you have this rule of 3, you can, with a particular confidence interval, determine what that upper bound is for your error rate. So that number with 245, with our 80% confidence interval, comes out to 0.01%. So exciting. When you go to 25, that number goes to 1%. So it sounds like a fairly significant loss for 100x, but 1% for false accept is still in the bounds of a lot of use cases. And we're not getting rid of the 245. We're basically establishing 2 new levels, the option. Like I said earlier, we have this ability in biometrics to sort of set the operating point by setting a threshold. So if you want to be just a little bit better than Touch Plus, to have that second factor, then your value proposition more warrants the low cost, right? And your relying party and the attestation that you provide also would be in sync with that, right? But if you're interested in that secure, let's step up Authenticate for that $1 million transaction for your car. I hope it's not $1 million for a car. Anyway, then you might go with the 245, right? And the certification working group is going to settle all this out and establish a security level for the authenticator to make it so simple for our consumers to understand exactly what level of authenticator they're going to get.
And can I just add 2 things? One is, if you opt for the 25 subjects, you are mandatorily required to submit test results that still prove the 1 in 10,000. And those test results need to comply with all the requirements that we have, the way you do the testing, the way you do the analysis today. So it's not that we say 1% is good enough. That's what the check's going to be with the lab. We still want the 1 in 10,000.
Yeah.
And the second aspect is, I hate when I think in twos. Wait, I can't remember what the second one is.
It was going to be great.
I remember.
Yes.
I do. All right. The second thing is related to other protections against brute force attack on a FIDO authenticator. Those protections are basically limits the number of tries that you can use that happens today, right? If you go into your device and you're locked out, you can only be locked out so many times, right? And then you're rejected. So if we think about what a false accept is, it's a brute force attack that, Greg picks up my phone and he doesn't have my fancy mask and he tries to use it. And if you're a criminal, you might, try some other people. And what's that probability? Well, what is another protection? Limit the number of attempts. That helps with brute force attacks, which is basically what a false accept is. I knew it was great.
That's awesome. Any other questions? Well, we were just too boring.
We do have a couple.
Oh.
Unfortunately not. We do have a few questions. Fortunately, you've been enthralling and everyone wants to learn more. So just a basic terminology question. So when we talk about biometric component, biometric authenticators, and biometric subsystems, can you kind of describe the differences between or amongst those things, and also what is it that we're actually certifying?
That's such a good question.
Yeah, I'm going to let you take that.
So the biometric working group is focused on solutions that would be paired with FIDO authenticators. That was our use case. IDWG is a whole nother group, and resting on what the work we've done in the biometrics group to look at remote identity proofing. So taking that aside, we'll say that's a separate question. If we focus on the biometric component, why we laid it out that way is because you can have it pre-integrated in, say, a phone, right? And that thing can go under testing. Or you could be a biometric, say, fingerprint vendor and say, like, this solution may go into phones and I want to test that, right? So you can come in from either direction. What functionality does it have to have? It has to have everything from capture to decision, basically. So it has to capture the biometric with those real people, and it has to say, yes, I accept, or no, I reject. Right? And you can reject because it doesn't match, or you can reject because you don't think it's a live person. And so it's got to have that whole end-to-end functionality, which is why we call it a scenario test and not a technology test.
That's really helpful. The other question from the app is, for results and certification of a particular biometric component, I think this might be, would those biometrics be pretty reliable and consistent when they're deployed, but they might be for different or varying use cases?
So I think I understand the question. So, when we have a broadly defined test that's not use case specific, but use cases might want to have different thresholds or be able to understand perhaps a different, be able to evaluate how the system operates at a lower level. And we don't do that. We are broadly applicable. We have specific thresholds that we target, and we hope that it's useful for a lot of use cases. We did that on purpose because if we do use case specific things, it gets challenging both to keep up to date with in terms of what the best practices for the labs are, and it narrows down the pool and it prevents us from being scalable. So we are targeting broadly applicable levels that would apply well to the FIDO authentication use case in general.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Still have a few more.
Good. I like lunch.
I mean, they're coming in. This is great. What should folks consider to be the most spoof-proof modality?
I refuse to answer that question. Technology changes so quickly, and vendors will say, I was a vendor once, I would say almost anything. But the thing is that DNA is pretty good if you can really get the right person's DNA. I mean, but come on, even DNA has twins, and it's complicated,
your
right?
DNA is everywhere.
Yeah.
I got your DNA already. I'm on it.
Stuff that's beneath the skin is pretty great, but
Well, and in my opinion, I think you should ask a different question: is this implementation spoof-proof, right? Not is this modality, right? Because the reality is anything can be spoofed, right? So you could have a very good implementation of face, right, that rejects all spoofs, and a poor implementation of fingerprint that doesn't reject spoofs, or the reverse is case. And so that's why we need the testing. You will hear things like the vein, right? Why is vein different? Vein is different because it's harder to get the source of the biometric from the person you're trying to attack. Because inevitably, spoofing is a targeted attack. So if someone's coming to say that this is why you want to use vein, it's not that you can't spoof a vein. If you have someone's vein pattern, you can definitely spoof the veins.
Yeah.
But it might be harder for me to get, Greg's vein pattern as it is a face. So
hard to get it.
That's
right.
what they're talking about when they do talk about it. But I encourage people not to talk about it in a modality level, but in a solution level.
And the attackers evolve very quickly.
Yeah.
So any answer we give is probably out of date by the time we provide it. So.
Yeah, but great question. Appreciate it.
Yeah. I appreciate the questions from the app, whether they came from the room or the stream. Thank you so much, Greg and Stephanie, for this awesome session. Please join me in thanking them.
So, you see that picture? I
Yeah.
think that's you.
So there
Oh,
are
awesome. B team.
there are some goodies up here if you want to check out. If you want to try to unlock Stephanie's phone, we're going to do that
Trick or
during
treat.
lunch.
Right.
But we will be in break until 1:45, so we have lunch and networking in the Expo Hall and foyer in Redmond as well. So please enjoy, and we'll see you back here at 1:45.